Hi guys, I wanted to do a video covering some of the things that everyone seems to have found tricky from our mocks. So this is one of a series of longer answer questions, I guess, that we need to get a bit better at structuring, a bit better at using the sort of technical language that's required. So I've kind of went a bit over the top with the features included in these specifications here. So you can see it's just a generic type question. Someone's replacing a computer system and they've got some different specifications that they're looking to replace it with. So I think for us, we need to maybe plan out our approach to this a bit better. And what your answer needs to have is addressing each of these points. So it might be worthwhile, especially given that we've had time left at the end of the exam, to just clarify each point that you want to make. And I would take each of these features in turn and just kind of highlight which one's actually better in each scenario and make sure that I've mentioned them all in my answer. So obviously if we compare them both just on clock speed, we can see that Spec 2 is the best. Then we have the CPU, which hopefully you guys would know right away that this is the word size of the instruction that the CPU can handle at the one time. So that will be specification 1 is the best. And then obviously, again, spec 1 with the quad core is better again. I'm actually thinking that the 64-bit is probably a bit out with the scope of our course, but definitely the quad core, dual core part, I would expect to see that coming in. Spec 2 wins on cache memory, and finally Spec 2 wins again on RAM. And these are what I would expect to see for all students making a good attempt at covering them. And now this is a strange one to mark because it's actually a rubric, and in order to achieve top marks on it, you need to demonstrate that you've got comprehensive understanding and knowledge of the key concepts to support your discussion that you're presenting. And you need to have like a sustained line of reasoning. And it's got to be clear and logically structured and coherent, and use of technical language. So really, if you have some sort of tick box, even if you just tick, physically score out right on your exam paper, whatever it needs to be, to make sure you've addressed each of the issues. So getting down to actually what would be a really good answer here, I would just start off going through each of the 2 points. So specification 2, and I'll fix my spelling because it will annoy me. Specification 2 has a higher clock speed compared to specification 1. Now this is the first point that a lot of people stop at, I guess, where they don't go into more depth, which if it was a 2-mark question for that, we'd only be picking up 1. So we need to elaborate on this. So always state your point on these and then elaborate on each of them. So what does that clock speed mean for the computer system and for this web designer editing documents? Well, the specification 2 can therefore deal with a greater number of instructions per second. Now, instructions is a great word to really show that you understand the underlying principles of how the computer deals with one instruction at a time, and it can just do millions of them per second, a ridiculously high number. So therefore, tasks and processes are completed quicker. And then we could give an example, e.g. Editing files, saving files, whatever it happens to be, any task in the computer system is going to be quicker. I could maybe do better and relate that back to web design. So saving web pages, whatever it happens to be, editing graphics, if it's searching through databases, whatever it happens to be that the question stem is, a good idea to relate it back to that. Other things that would be nice to put in is the kind of maybe the drawback. So it's always good to have a pro and con of each point. So you could say, however, the faster clock speed will generate more heat and therefore use more energy than specification 1. Fix the spelling. Now, hopefully you can see what I've done here now, and I'm going to add this into what your structure should try and be. Try and have a positive and a negative for each of these points in your essay, in your approach to answering this question, so that it's balanced. I mean, this one's slightly difficult because there are other factors that would come into whether it's an equal PC or an equal desktop as well. There's other factors to that, but basically the faster processor is going to use more energy. So we could, in some instances, add in negatives. There's not always negatives to each one. I'll skip over the 64-bit part because I'm not going to write about that, but obviously you could just include that that every instruction, let's just write it, every instruction and specification 2 is twice as large as that in specification 2. So I've actually made a mistake there. Specification 1 is twice as large. That means twice as much data is processed with every clock cycle / instruction. I really think this is a wee bit above and beyond what we want to cover at this level, so I won't worry too much about that one. Not really negatives to the quad core as much as the clock speed has. So what can we put there? Well, specification 1 has a quad core processor compared to spec 2, which has a dual core. This is 4 individual processors versus only 2. This means that 4 activities, which would be better actually saying instructions or processes is a better technical language to use, can be carried out at the same time versus only 2 with which one's got 2 again? Specification 2. This will be useful for downloading items whilst editing and carrying out many activities at the same time. Alternatively, this is again, I'm going in a real lot of depth. I wouldn't expect to see all of this, so if you had any of it would be useful. Alternatively, the 4 processors can share the execution of the same program. Again, speeding up time taken to complete processes like loading applications. Try and get our technical language up there. Fix the spelling. And again, just following the structure I have here, Cache, again, can't really think of any negatives off my head about it apart from being expensive if he wants to pay for more. But again, that's not really something that's indicative to the question here. And again, the higher number's better. So spec 2 has higher capacity cache memory. This is used to store the most commonly used instructions. Therefore, when these instructions are carried out, they are completed faster than those which have to be fetched from main memory. This means specification 2 will execute the most common instructions much faster than spec 1. Now, one thing to note here, if there are things that are the same in the question, literally just point that out, that the bandwidth might be the same of the CPU if they're the same, or if the cache is the same. Don't just neglect to mention them, and mention what they're actually used for, because that shows the examiner you really understand what's going on. Now, RAM tends to be the one that's always asked. So again, just point out the obvious. Spec 2 has a higher capacity of RAM and can handle having more programs open at the same time compared to spec 1. This also means that larger, more complex programs could be installed. So either there's more data to be shared between many smaller programs, or if you've got really complex, massive programs for web editing, then they are obviously able to be installed and used. Another good one to really show that you understand what else happens with the processor when it runs out of memory. Having a larger memory will reduce the chances or the need for swapping. So that's something we talked about when the RAM's filled, that it swaps the tasks and stores them in backing storage and loads in other tasks to give them, well, it's not the same as paging and scheduling, to store them in secondary storage. For swapping data to main memory and secondary storage / virtual memory. Now remember, virtual memory is just like backing storage that's used as RAM under pretense. So in this case, that would actually be a good thing here to make up for the fact that spec 1 has got faster processors. So you could say something like this: in some way will make up for the greater instruction size with spec 1. And I would just summarize with which one you would recommend and just like a 1 point why. So I would recommend, and I guess spec 2 wins on most of these, specification 2, as it has more RAM and more cache memory. The summary's kind of already in here anyway, which will benefit the web designer more. I mean, they're both pretty good machines. It's tricky to put in there. So things to note. This is like a really important question for us, I guess, given the mock results that some of us have had. 6 marks, follow a sustained line of reasoning, make sure it's balanced, make sure you mention each of the features mentioned in the specification here, and try and put positives and negatives, try and relate it back. Points like the fact that this has more RAM offsets the fact that it has a 64-bit quad-core processor in some ways. So if one's got a higher amount of cache here, which would have been a good point to mention earlier, in fact, that the fact specification 2 has more cache makes up in some way for the smaller instruction size, the smaller word size of the processor, so they can relate it back. But ultimately, what you should be doing is planning out your attack for this a bit more. You don't even have to have some sort of plan like this. Just tick which one's the best in your on your actual exam paper, and maybe just score them out when you've actually mentioned them in your response to make sure you cover all the bases. Now, bullet points for this is not the way to go. It's got to be a discussion with a good structure in there. But ultimately, if you're really struggling, pointing out facts and explaining things with bullet points would be all right, but you would not be getting the 6 marks. You'd be lucky to get 3, I imagine, if you are only going with bullet points, possibly even 2, depending on how well you link those actual points. So it's got to be in a good essay format almost. So this is one worth practicing, and obviously to practice it, you've got to understand what each of the different features brings to a computer system. So get practicing and really rehearsing this one. Very important for us from our mocks, as a lot of us struggled to answer this very, very well.